The father and mentor of the protagonist always told him that people do what they are capable of to survive in this world. The main character made a living with the art of combat. The young man dreamed of becoming the head of the family, the owner of a home. From a young age, when he was starting to study martial arts, he believed that a man should set grand goals for himself. At some point, he already considered himself a very strong person, ready for anything in his way, and was determined to become the best, living a prosperous life with his family. However, he began to think more realistically when his father defeated him. Despite sleeping only 2 hours a day and spending all his time training, except for breaks for food and other necessities, he never managed to beat his father. This was very embarrassing, considering that his father was not even a great warrior. He was just a wandering warrior and an old man. The father reassured his son that his skills were enough to earn a living, and if he was careful, he could even live to old age. The father was very modest and wanted his son to be the same. But that was the problem. The main character had much greater ambitions and set the bar much higher. Thus, he worked tirelessly, braving storms and freezing temperatures. The young man hoped that a person who put in such great efforts would be worthy of becoming famous and recognized everywhere. However, it was difficult to say if his efforts were worth anything in the end. After his father's departure, the young man lived as an exceptional fighter and even earned the title of superb problem solver. He decided to tell himself that his father was simply unbeatable to avoid feeling ashamed of his numerous defeats against an old man. However, this thought always left him feeling disheartened, mainly because his father was the only one who ever beat him. Therefore, the protagonist decides to venture into the forbidden territory of Miram, where his father had warned him never to go. He was confident he could claim his place there and defeat any opponent in combat. It was during this time that he met a young woman who appeared untamable. From their very first encounter, she came from a wealthy family and was always dressed in expensive attire. Now that they are married, everyone around her seems to be dressing up, perhaps due to her aura. The protagonist worked even harder to ensure his wife lacked nothing. But there was a problem. His money was barely enough for one person, let alone two. Even though they did not spend much, it was a struggle to make ends meet. Nonetheless, she never complained and thanked her husband for every penny he brought home. Although he told her not to thank him, she continued. Her kind words strengthened him, and his friends joked that he was too in love with his wife. However, he ignored their comments, knowing their wives were nowhere near as amazing as his come-on. When she became pregnant, the protagonist was the happiest man alive. This would be his child, his flesh and blood. As someone who had lost both his mother and father, he had always dreamed of starting a large family and becoming the head of a new generation. He had everything he wanted. But the gods were not kind to him. When the time for childbirth arrived, it lasted for many hours. Of course, the main protagonist stood outside their house, praying everything would turn out well. If only he could have taken his wife's pain upon himself, he would have done so. However, the midwife came out and told him that despite their numerous efforts, the baby still hadn't appeared. The father had to decide whether to save the mother or the child. Of course, he chose to save the mother. But the young woman came out to him despite the pain she was experiencing, to tell him that she disagreed. Whatever happened, she had to give birth. They took her inside to prevent further harm, and after some time, the baby finally arrived and cried out. The man barely had time to rejoice when the midwife told him that there was another one and sent him to fetch 2 more women. He ran to the village. Ultimately, the main protagonist's wife gave birth to 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. The midwife placed the newborns in his arms, and for the first time, the man cried. He had never cried before, not even in moments of great injury on the brink of life and death. But now he wept tears of joy, for he held his children for the first time. Suddenly, the young woman began to ask for his forgiveness, saying that she should have stayed with her husband, but she did not have the strength for it. After that, she took her last breath. Tears of happiness turned into tears of grief, and the man cursed the gods for such injustice. He wanted to drag the god from his heavenly throne and tear him to pieces. What had he done to deserve such injustice? He may have worked as a mercenary, but he had never done anything wrong and never harmed women, children, or the elderly. So why was he being punished like this? The midwife confirmed that the mother of the children had died. Afterward, the woman took the grieving father's children to care for them. The main protagonist could do nothing but cry next to the still warm body of his wife. He took his dead wife's hand and kissed it, pressing it to his cheek. He asked her forgiveness for not having the time to mourn her properly. After all, he had to raise their children worthily. He saw her face. The young woman died happy because in her last moments, she was with her husband and newborn children. The main protagonist promised his wife that they would see each other again when he had raised their children and could finally rest. Then he left the house, where 3 midwives with children in their arms were waiting for him outside. Why were they all born at once and not at least one child yearly? Such thoughts visited the man, but he tried to push them away. For they were his children, and he had to take care of them, even if it would be very difficult. The man asked the head midwife to find 2 wet nurses and take care to ensure that they had enough milk to feed his children and also to look after the newborns. Today, the first thing the man did was bury his wife, simply alone in a wooden coffin. The young woman would have to wait for him for a long time, as he must live until he has raised their 3 children, and they have started their own families. Only then will they meet again in another world. After the modest funeral, he took out all the valuables in their house. It turned out that his wife kept cheap jewelry that her husband used to give her, even though he told her to throw them away when he bought more expensive ones. This should be enough for 10 years, even with 3 children. However, he cannot think about it now. He must earn as much as possible to give his children the best. His job, however, is dangerous, and it is unknown what will happen to the children if he dies. They have no other relatives, and they definitely won't survive on their own. So he must take care of himself until the children can live independently. After that, the main protagonist goes to the man who usually gives him work. He offers to be his bodyguard in the morning and evening but asks for a reasonable sum. The wealthy man just laughs in his face, saying that it's too much and he wouldn't pay that much. Then the new father asks him for another safe but highly paid job. Of course, there were no such jobs. The more expensive the job, the more dangerous it was. However, when the rich man remembers the situation the main protagonist was in, he offers to recruit him into the Sword Clan in the Alliance of the Heavenly Dragon. They are recruiting martial arts masters, and now all the mercenaries and wanderers are flocking there as everyone wants to join the respected clans of Mirror. They also pay well, so if he's lucky, the guy will have enough to support himself and his children. The main protagonist is not very confident that he can handle this task. The Sword Clan and the Alliance of the Heavenly Dragon are 2 highly respected organizations by the standards of Mura. Even if he passes, isn't it dangerous? After all, the clans are fighting each other, and he will have to fight against much stronger opponents than ever before, constantly. That's why he's not sure if it's a good idea until the man who advised him on this says anyone could now live peacefully in Mura. The war ended a few years ago, and now the 4 great clans are perfectly balanced with each other. Then the protagonist decided that he must cope with this as he is good at solving problems. The protagonist arrived where the warriors were selected and approached the registration area. The man registering the participants saw in the protagonist a mercenary with a huge zeal for victory and gave him a black thread to tie on his wrist before sending him to start the trials. People around him whispered that the young man looked confident and would surely pass. Noh Gajang then began to undergo the trials. The first test was to lift a stone which many men before him who were much larger in stature couldn't do. The protagonist thought the stone must have been really heavy, but he managed to lift it and hold it above his head. He was surprised at how light the stone was, while those who watched the trials were astonished that someone could do it, especially after seeing the other participants fail despite their best efforts. The next test was to jump over a pit filled with glass shards. The protagonist thought the pit was too small to test his agility, so he assumed it was meant to test his courage. The protagonist hesitated for a few seconds before jumping and passing the test with ease. Noh Gajang found it perplexing. They were purportedly recruiting fighters, yet why were the trials so facile? The next challenge was to cleave a log in half with a single strike. The protagonist pondered whether they were also recruiting lumberjacks. A man standing beside him was fervently calculating his blow, summoning all the strength he could muster for this critical and intricate test of his mettle. At that moment, the protagonist, without any apparent effort, cleanly split the same log. Everyone present wondered if he might be a lumberjack. Still, even so, the log should not have split so easily. However, Noh Gajang confidently stated that the standard payment was usually accompanied by family allowances. He asked for not much, just education for his children, a house near his workplace, and it would be nice to have a nanny for them. The mentor hesitated, and the protagonist thought that he was asking for too much and had probably gone too far. Then he decided that he would pay for the nanny himself. But he definitely needed education and a house, or he would not be able to raise his children. The man was afraid that he had asked for too much and might be kicked out of this place right now. Noh Gajang left the Sword Clan feeling completely disappointed. How could one of the most respected clans in Merim treat its warriors like this and not even provide support for their families? They were nothing but greedy fools. He had only asked for a little, just everything he needed to raise his 3 children. Was the Heavenly Dragon Alliance the same? There was only one way to find out. The main character easily passed the test in another organization and also asked the mentor about support for families. he received the same answer that it was not provided, but they were willing to take care of it. Here they would allocate him a house, albeit not very close but still in a castle, so it should be suitable for the man. There was a martial arts school in the alliance, but if he did not want his children to pursue it, he could always send them to a regular school, so there should be no problem with that. The mentor even said that they were not against paying for a nanny for his children. Noh Gajang was happy and ready to undergo as many trials as necessary, but the mentor already understood his abilities and replied that there was no need for that. In the evening, while putting his children to bed, the man worries about his new job and responsibilities. He is almost angry at his wife for the first time because he will have to do everything alone. Noh Gajang does not know how to be a good father, at least partly because the person who was supposed to be an example for him did not participate in his life during his childhood. Nevertheless, despite any difficulties, he must raise his children and give them everything that other parents give their children. The most important thing is that they do not grow up to be the same scoundrels as their father. Noh Gajang began his search for a nanny, promising good pay, and therefore there were quite a few applicants. However, finding the right one proved to be a difficult task. Women came who believed they would be hired only for their beauty, and elderly women with vast experience. But at that age, they could barely hear what the man was saying. He was almost desperate to find the right one when a tall and strong-looking woman entered the room. From the first glance, she understood that the house was dirty and smelled of mold, so she began cleaning even before being hired. She took the crying and hungry children and fed them immediately. The man realized that he had found the perfect nanny. The main character was given a certificate of a first-class warrior. These were the best warriors of the Union of the Heavenly Dragon, and the man needed to behave accordingly. He was also assigned his first task, to stand guard at the gate. The person who gave him this task began to reassure Noh Gajang that all rookies have to go through this, and such tasks will not always be assigned to him. However, the main character did not want any tasks other than his guard duty, especially on his day off, and he tried to persuade his boss to find someone else for the job. This greatly surprised the boss as other warriors tried to show themselves in the best light, but this one, on the contrary, does not want to move beyond the post of a guard. The father of 3 children is perfectly satisfied with his safe and well-paying job,